Vanguard, proof that you can be rich and ethical. Today, one of the most popular and trusted means of investing and growing one's income is through investing in index funds. There are many index funds brands like SPDR, ProShares, but the most popular and trusted index funding brand is Vanguard. In this video, we're going to talk about the history of index funds and how Vanguard became the biggest index trading platform. Nowadays, most people usually talk about index funding investment, how it's the fastest way to grow your wealth over time, usually long-term. With its high valuation and low vitality, and also with the ease of index funds, it's quite obvious how index funds are quite popular today. Although index funds are not really the classic investment tool that you think. 30 years ago, index funds were awarded, and at the same time, 50 years ago, index funds never existed. It was later in 1972 that the first ever index funds were created. Vanguard entered the business a few years later in 1975, and since then, he grew into being a king of index funds. Today, the largest index funds are the SPDR SPY ETF, and this is quite abnormal. Take a look at this. If you look below SPY, you can see that the top 10 are actually Vanguard, and 31 out of the top 100 funds are also from Vanguard. You must be wondering who this mysterious Vanguard is. I'm going to do a rundown as to how Vanguard became the second largest investment firm in the whole world. To begin with, a man named John C Bogle, who was born on the 8th of May, 1921, before the Great Depression began. John's parents lost their savings and were forced to also sell the house. John's father, because he was depressed, started drinking, and because he became an alcoholic, it led to his divorce. John was alone at a very tender age and started to plan his life himself. His path to success was education, and together with his twin brother David, studied so hard and tried to be ahead of others in their school. John's academic record landed him a spot in a school, and today the school, Blair Academy, charges $66,500 per year. What a huge amount of money. Now, I understand why it's not largely populated, but I may be wrong. John continued to do so much in Blair, and this led him to also get into Princeton. While there, he majored in economics and investments. During his junior and senior year in college, he wrote a thesis paper called The Economic Goal of the Investment Company. This could actually land him his very first job, but the story goes that Walter Morgan, CEO of Wellington Investments, read John's paper and wrote to him after. That was how John quickly became the start of the funding, and in 1965, he got promoted to being an assistant manager of the funding. While being in the funding, John pushed for another funding that would be less concentrated than Wellington's other coins. The new fund was a huge success. In 1975, when Walter retired, he took the funding. What do you think John's agenda is for the company? Kindly comment your opinions in the comment section below, and if you love to learn about investments like me, please give this video some thumbs up. Okay, back to the video. In the 1970s, John did a merger that became a disaster, and he was fired. What amazes me is that John never frowned or felt sad. John was down to earth, and despite all these failures, he still started his own company called Vanguard in 1974, and that was how the index investment fund had started. But guess what? According to history, the first ever index funding can be traced back to Chicago students Edward Renshaw and Paul Feldstein. These students actually started the idea of investment funding back in 1960. Now, here is the sad part. Their idea did not have any funding at that time, so a decade later, a company decided to help them and turn their vision into reality. Their idea of a company was similar to index funding. That is why we say that John was not the first to create index funding, but he made it popular. So I guess he still deserves a lot of accolades. Now, back in 1970, index funding didn't gain lots of respect in Wall Street, so John's funding didn't gain recognition immediately. Investors didn't really like the idea back then. The investors' reasons were because they felt that they themselves can do the index funding if they want to. They also believed that index funding is supposed to beat the market and not match the market, so they didn't approve of it immediately. That was why Vanguard was not accepted at the start. He was not able to meet his target at the time. But John did not relent. He felt index funding would become very popular because of his own reasons. He believed that his index funding would become popular with time. He reduced the fees for people to be able to invest. The annual fee of the S&P 500, for example, was just 0.03% per year. Crazy, right? Want to know what this means? This means that for every $10,000 you invest, Vanguard only charges $3 per year. This made it more attractive. He also believed that with time, active funds will lose to their market, and with time, you will notice that this is what is always the case with most funds. But if we trace back to the 1970s, John's low funds were not that convincing anymore. At the end of the first year, index funds grew up to a whopping $17 million. But when the bull market started in 1982, after the inflation of the 1970s, the indices started to grow at a good rate. Because of this, people started gaining interest in index funding, and at the same time, these funds were still largely avoided by people. In the 1980s, there was an era called the 401k era. This era was started by Vanguard. Instead of directly focusing on stockbrokers with their index funds, Vanguard switched interest to companies. Instead of Wall Street to focus on getting their huge returns after investing, companies focused on giving their workers a low-cost, efficient, and much stable investment. As he would have it, index funds became the best option for this. Vanguard became the first choice for retirement and 401k plans. People's interest slowly started moving to Vanguard with time, as predicted by John. At this time, Vanguard did not stop at targeting direct investors. They got more options for their investors. In 1986, Vanguard launched their second funding, called the Total Bond Fund. In December 1987, Vanguard launched an external market index funding, which tracks the stock market as a whole. After that, Vanguard continued to launch different kinds of funding. Each of these funds have different focuses, either to small market companies, commodities, and so on. All of these fundings led to Vanguard booming in the 1980s. No wonder they're so popular now. And guess what? They ended a decade with $55 billion of assets. Some may think that they made so much money from the company, but when you look at their extremely low fees, you would understand that they need to make more money and earn like a company having $55 billion of assets. For example, with Vanguard having a few of 0.2%, they would only be earning $6.7 million per year, despite managing to have $55.8 billion. Despite all of this, good things still happened to Vanguard. They still grew and grew so big in the 1990s. One of the development of the 1990s and early 2000s was the sudden rise of tech companies. Tech companies pay their employees extremely well, which makes their retirement funds so lucrative. In 2005, Vanguard's assets, which were under management, made up to $1 trillion. That is so much money being pumped in, am I right? Maybe I should start my own investment company. Later on, John retired from Vanguard in the year 1999 because he reached the retirement age at the time, when he was 70 years old. Since John retired, the new leaders of Vanguard shifted their focus more on actively generated funds. And guess what? This made index funds more popular. In the late 2000s, a guy named Buffer made a famous bet on what we call hedge funds, and this made return investors take it easy on market returns. This made Vanguard's assets under management increase to $7.5 trillion. Someone scream money. But for me, one of the things that impresses me about Vanguard, apart from their profit, is their ethics. The only profit Vanguard makes is from the fees they charge for their funds. Vanguard was better than those in Wall Street, and Wall Street is known for bad ethics. Want to know something interesting? Vanguard does not actually have any investors. John believed that it was a major conflict of interest to offer stock to a company that was meant to generate the returns as soon as possible. John decided that Vanguard would have no ownership. It does not have any stock and it's not privately owned. Like Vanguard loves to say, Vanguard is owned by the investors of funds. John also gave half of his profits to charity. Talk about selflessness. Also, his net worth was roughly $80 million. That's a huge amount, right? But if we look at the statistics, someone having properties under management worth trillions of dollars is supposed to be worth more. That's to show that all the money generated from Vanguard goes back to the people. This is sweet. I hope Vanguard upholds his ethics because John passed away in 2019. Despite this, I'm confident that his legacy will live on. So, we've come to the end of the video. What do you guys think of Vanguard's business model? Comment in the comment section below, and if you are a lover of investment, please hit the like button below. See you in my next video.